and down you go with all the other books I hate.
Okay, so today I'm just doing a quick rant about long books, and the reason that I'm talking about this is, as you saw in the beginning, I just finished reading the second book of Mistborn. Oh gosh, it was over 700 pages, almost 800 pages, and it was not worth it. Sorry, Brandon Sanderson fans, if you're coming for me, I really did like the first Mistborn. I thought I did a lot of good world building things, and maybe one day I will talk about it in the context of world building, but it's my spring break, and one spring break I spent watching 36 episodes of a Chinese drama, and frankly, even though it took my entire spring break, that was a better use of my time than spending an entire Monday, one single day of spring break, reading this book. There were parts of the book that were exciting, and I did like at least one of the characters, the Kandra in the book, but a lot of it was just like... So I'm going to try and make this not a rant about Mistborn, and I'm sorry for those of you who really like it, but instead we're going to talk about long books, okay? So, first of all, when I first started writing books, I didn't know word count. I think I've talked about this before. I didn't know that word count was the important thing. I thought it was page numbers. I also didn't know that most books aren't, like, single-spaced. And so I paced myself, excited for this first book, writing, and I paced myself so that it would be, like, and for it to be 300 pages. So, writing single-spaced, you know, thinking about the half of the book needs to be at, like, 150. Hopefully you can see where this is going. Because I also didn't really know where I was going. I had too many characters, too many angles going on. It ended up being 400 pages, single-spaced. And most of you will know that that means it's about 800 pages. Double-spaced or as a normal book. It was a lot of words, a ridiculous amount of words. I don't have the word count offhand. I did finally finish it, like 10 years later, and then I did an edit of it, and I cut it almost in half. One edit. Alright? And in this exercise, I realized a lot of things I had done. I had repeated myself. I had gone rambling into characters' thoughts. And there was a lot of things that, like, a lot of scenes that were kind of the same thing over and over, didn't really build the plot, were just kind of fun for me. And I realized that I didn't actually lose anything cutting, like, 300 pages from that book. It's the same book. It still needs a lot more edits. There are some actual plot things I think I will cut if I go through it again. But right now, like, 300 pages less, and it's still the same book, pretty much. A little better. In fact, I added some scenes that really added to the plot. So that tells you how much crap I had just put in that book. It did not need to be 800 pages. It's a big cast. It's a lot of characters to handle, and even still, it didn't need to be 800 pages. So, my point here is, as writers, I think especially inexperienced writers, we see these big books, we get excited about making things large and putting all of our thoughts into it, but most of your books do not need to be that long. So, I know a lot of people who are chronic underwriters, and I've actually started to become an underwriter, but if you are a overwriter, like I used to be, one of the things that really helped me was NaNoWriMo, because NaNoWriMo forced me to tell a story in only 50,000 words. And I know some people will do, like, NaNoWriMo where they do 50,000 words of their book, but I always did it. My goal was to write a book in a month, a whole book, alright? And the goal was for it to at least be 50,000 words. And that's what I've done for, like, oh gosh, 8 years, 7 years, something like that. I've written a book in a month. An entire book, beginning to end. They're messy, they're kind of scattered, mostly they need a lot more detail, but it really helped me get the pacing better so that I could have a story that's concise, that has good plot beats, that's leading up to somewhere. Because as I've been noticing, Brandon Sanderson is not the only one who does this, where when they write a long book, it kind of just meanders nowhere. Which is what I felt happened in this Mistborn book. But another one people often complain about doing some of the similar things. I don't think they attribute it to length, but I would think length would be a part of that, is We Hunt the Flame. A lot of people talk about how We Hunt the Flame repeats itself, kind of meanders a little bit. I actually liked We Hunt the Flame better than the second Mistborn book, because her descriptions are good. When she does include the description and it is going somewhere, like near the beginning when the guy is running through the streets, I actually felt like I was there, and so I appreciated that. However, again, when she gets into the emotional things, she has her character say the same things like 50 times, very repetitive. I'm like, we've been through this, you've shown me you can write in the early pages of your book, and so I think she could have benefited from a shorter book in the second half. I think the first half was well paced, and then I think the second half she was meandering. So that's another thing to consider when you're writing as well. Don't meander. I am very against having specific plot beats, which is probably terrible. Maybe that's why I'm not published. But I think you can organically tell a story without, having Red save the cat. But, that being said, you have to have some kind of a plot. There has to be a direction. And not feints either. There's a lot of feints in Mistborn where he kind of makes you think something's going to happen. In the second book, I should clarify. First book was a lot better. But he makes you think something's going to happen and it leads nowhere. There's a reason why when we talk about wild goose chases, it's always with a negative like, oh, this is just a wild goose chase. Because we don't enjoy the feeling of being a wild goose chase. We want to feel like our journeys are going somewhere, that there's a purpose to them. And reading the second book of Mistborn just felt like a lot of wild goose chases. Like I was being dragged through the briars of goose chases, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I got all these thorns for nothing? That's what it felt like. In fact, I got all these thorns just to be given more thorns in the end. I have very strong feelings about this book right now. So maybe like sometimes you get overexcited about plot things. And what I would say too is make sure you edit the second half of the book as well as you edit the first, because a lot of people suffer from that syndrome where they're like really good at editing the first. This is actually true for a lot of series, is that authors will edit their first book so much that their second book falls to the wayside, and I feel like that's what happened with Mistborn. I haven't read the second book of Red Queen, but I've been told that it happened with that book as well. I heard the second Percy Jackson, sorry if you love that one, but my brother said that that one kind of falters a bit. So I think, oh, and sorry James Riley, as much as I love your books, Story of Thieves was just not as good as Half Upon a Time. And so I think we get excited about editing our first work, our first couple of chapters, and then we kind of just hope the rest of the story follows along. So I know there are some people who start editing in the middle and will do a second half. Someone told me recently about how they edited backwards, but these are just like things to keep in mind as you're writing, is that you do need some kind of pacing. You don't need to lead us on wild goose chases. Most of the time that won't make us feel good and want to read your books, and there are some people who don't read books for wanting to feel good, but for a lot of people it's entertainment. That's what they want. They want to be entertained. And also just making sure that you edit not just the first half, but you also edit the second half of your book as intensely. So that's my kind of semi-rant for today. It's just like, not a lot of direction, but mostly like you don't need a long book. You are not Victor Hugo, and as much as people adore Les Mis, a lot of people actually complain about how freaking long his books are. So you don't usually need that long of a book, and it can be a much more enjoyable experience for your reader. So me, as someone who has a really hard time sitting down and reading a book, I do get kind of fixated on a book once I start reading, but the idea of sitting down and reading is hard. Like, please edit and make sure your books are concise so that it's actually saying something throughout the book. That's my main push here. If you need to try things, try writing shorter books, making sure things are important, using your baby readers, but like, that is my plea. Because I do not want to be dragged through a briar patch of goose chases again, if possible. That said, there is one really long book that I do appreciate, and that is The Brothers Karamazov. I haven't read it in a while, but Russian novels, I feel like, do a better job of creating long books that work. Sometimes they obviously do ramble. There's a whole part in it that does go off about the priest. But also, plug for my favorite author again, Sir Walter Scott's books are long. And they do have description, but honestly, it's not a goose chase. Like, there are things happening. I feel invested in the characters. I feel like it's going somewhere. I've read this book 5 times, and like I said, it's hard for me to read. And if you want to look at it, like, those are small words. And it's like 450 pages. If you can write like Sir Walter Scott, and if you can write like the first Mistborn book, I'm not saying you have to have a short book, but your book needs to say something if it's going to be that long. And you should really, really consider, like, do you need a book that long? Anyways, thanks for joining me for this rant today. If you stuck through this and you don't hate me for hating on Sanderson, I'm sorry. I'm sure he's great. Like, everyone tells me his first books are all great in all of the series. But, that's it for today. That's my rant. So, comment on your least favorite long book. Bye.